Hey everybody, this is Ray.
And this is Derek.
And we are here now continuing our blowout coverage for the GoldenEye remake for the Wii. Today we are going to be focusing in on just the multiplayer.
That's right, I didn't really cover it all that much when in our review of it, which you should check out if you haven't. But Ray wanted to go over multiplayer, which is obviously a huge hook in GoldenEye.
Of course, I mean, it's everything that every modern multiplayer is compared to, of course, is the N64 GoldenEye. So we had to see if this current multiplayer for GoldenEye could live up to such, its predecessor's hype. So myself, Derek, and Kevin all gathered together for some 3-player split-screen action, and I was pretty pleased with the results.
Oh, totally. It definitely has that old-school Bond feel. It's a different game in a different time, so it's not exactly the same as you remember, but in a lot of ways that's better. I don't know about you, Ray, but I can still play Bond multiplayer, the 64 version, with friends, but when you compare it, even today, it's still playable, but when you compare it to this new one, I mean, GoldenEye's obviously benefited from more than a decade of control refinements, and you can feel it in the new version.
No, definitely. I mean, what was interesting is I used the classic controller, and you used the Wiimote, and so did Kevin. And you guys swear by that, but I still swear by that classic controller. Having a controller in your hand, using two joysticks, shoulder buttons and whatnot to really get that old school feel like I had my N64 controller in my hand. Of course, the classic controller has more of a GameCube feel to it, but still, I felt that was the way to go with it. But you guys felt you needed the Wiimote.
Yeah, absolutely, but they're both very functional to begin with, right? I mean, the Classic Controller Pro, which Ray reviewed, the special GoldenEye version, so you should check that out as well. But it works. If you're used to having 2 thumbsticks, if you're the kind of player who plays shooters a lot and you're really used to that, then that's probably the way to go. Now, if you're like Kevin and I, more of a casual shooter fan, you don't play them all that much, if you're sort of open to a new control experience, I think Kevin agrees with me. If he doesn't, we'll just say he does. Kevin agrees with me. So the point is, with the Wiimote and Nunchuck, I feel it's much closer to the mouse and keyboard setup for a shooter, which is obviously the ideal. That's the best way to control a first-person shooter. But I feel the Wiimote and Nunchuck is really the second best way to do it. You're not fumbling with 2 thumbsticks. And of course, Ray is a seasoned shooter player, so he's used to it. But if you're open to trying something new, I think there's a huge benefit to the Wiimote and Nunchuck. I actually think the Wii is one of the best platforms for shooters, at least conceptually, even though it doesn't often show up in terms of software. But GoldenEye's an exception.
Most definitely, and it's an interesting point because I do have more of a Xbox 360 shooter background, so that is why probably I am more comfortable with the actual controller. But, I mean, you mentioned, of course, the shooter and the concept and how it works for Wii, but what's interesting about GoldenEye is how well the online play works. We also went into the online play. We did some team stuff. We did some one-on-one conflict, or I should say, man versus man, every man for himself conflict. And what was interesting about it is that there's no lag whatsoever, quick load times, got you right into the game. It might also be because of smaller sizes, only 8 people in a room at a time, but you really got the feel for old school GoldenEye action without an ounce of lag.
Yeah, and that's the really impressive thing. Of course, there is the trade-off you mentioned. There aren't as many players. It's just not possible on the Wii as you would have on a 360 or a PS3. But here's how they get around it. It doesn't feel like a small amount because the maps feel smaller to me. And so you have 8 players or so, but in such a small map, you're constantly running into players. So it's very action-packed. Even though there's fewer players, you're constantly trying to survive. You're constantly gunning and running, and I don't know. It's just a lot of fun on Wii. To me, it's one of the best online shooters I've played on Wii.
And considering that remember folks, the original GoldenEye was 4 players locally, that was it. So the fact that you're up to 8 players now, it is a big improvement. And it is something that old school guys like myself, it is kind of a shock to play GoldenEye with 8 people now. But also, like you mentioned, the level redesign, none of the levels are the same as they were in the original GoldenEye. So if you're coming in here, you and me, Derek, we're seasoned GoldenEye veterans, of course, so we kind of know where the ruins go and where the secret doors are and the facility. Everything's been redesigned, not in just the game, but especially the multiplayer itself. So that level redesign and that smaller level design makes you not notice the lack of 16 people in a room.
Yeah, definitely, Ray. It's an all-new version of Bond to get totally re-obsessed with, just like we did back in the day. And the thing is, it feels like Bond. It has that old-school charm. This isn't just a Wii shooter that has GoldenEye in the title. It really does feel like GoldenEye, from the design to the gameplay to the layouts. It definitely has that old-school shooter feel. So you're not just buying a generic shooter that's been rebranded. It really does bring back all those memories from the late 90s. You know, for me, Ray, high school was Bond. You know, you got together in study hall, you talked about playing Bond after school. And you know, kids, see, we didn't have it like you. We didn't have all this online business. We had to ride bikes to each other's houses.
That's right. We had to do things locally, and then we'd get like a little dry erase board, and we put together our own little tournaments and everything. I won a couple of those back in the day, but that's not neither here nor there. But there are a couple of things that I found lacking, at least if you are looking for that more old school experience. There's no gadgets. The Moonraker laser is gone. I mean, it's of course because there's still the Golden Gun mode and whatnot like that. But you know, they're going with this more serious James Bond, you know, Daniel Craig style. And although it has its positives, to me, one of the negatives is I miss laser watches.
Yeah, definitely. It still feels over the top. It still feels Bond, but if you played the original, it's going to feel scaled back to you. And like you mentioned, it was a conscious design choice that Activision and Eurocom and those guys made. And it doesn't really affect it too much, but if you're expecting the lasers and the gadgets, it's definitely, there's that bit of nostalgia that's lacking in the new version.
Definitely, but there still are proximity mines and whatnot, so there are a few goodies still in there, but I mean, hands down, I have to say that this is the best multiplayer experience on the Wii by leaps and bounds.
Yeah, definitely, I would agree. At least for shooters online, you know, there are a few others that are really good on Wii, but this one, to me, is the most fun because it matches that Nintendo feel. There are a couple of military, you know, army-type shooters on Wii that work well online, and other different kinds of shooters, but for that Nintendo over-the-top gamey feel, your best bet is still Bond.
And I think on that note, I think we've pretty much beaten multiplayer to death. I definitely think you get our opinion, folks. We love it. We think it's great. Definitely check out Derek's full review, though, if you haven't already, for the single-player campaign mode. And for CGR Undertow, I'm Ray.
And I'm Derek.
And good gaming.